A woman was abandoned by her fiancé without a word, all because she was too fat. Dressed in her handmade wedding dress, clutching an old suitcase, she stood alone under the stares and cruel whispers of strangers. Everyone thought that was the end of her story, but they were wrong. That was the moment she started writing her own. If you want to find out how she turned humiliation into strength, don't forget to drop a comment, and subscribe, because the most powerful parts of her story are still to come. The train's whistle shrieked like a wounded animal fading into the hot, dry air as Amelia Gray stood alone on the creaky platform of Willow Creek Station. She gripped her old valise, the leather worn thin, her hands sweaty inside her cotton gloves. Her yellow dress, the one she'd spent weeks sewing to fit her wide frame, felt too tight under the August sun. Folks passing by stared, their whispers sharp as burrs caught in her skirt. She'd crossed half the country, 3 trains, and a bone-rattling stagecoach chasing James Harper's letters, those sweet words promising a home, a life, a man who'd see past her size. Amelia adjusted her bonnet, her fingers shaky but careful, like looking pretty might still bring him running. James had written, "I don't care about your shape, Amelia, only the heart inside." She'd read that line so often the paper was soft as an old quilt. Standing there, sweat dripping down her back, she scanned the station for a man with a kind smile, maybe a daisy in his coat like he'd promised. Carriages clattered past, kicking up clouds of red dirt that stung her eyes. Men tipped hats to other women. Every squeak of a wheel sparked a jolt of excitement, then a sick feeling when no one stopped. Across the street, behind a stack of splintered crates, James Harper crouched, his eyes locked on her. He'd seen her step off the train, her dress bright as a sunflower against the gray platform, and his gut twisted. She was heavier than he'd imagined, way heavier. His jaw clenched, a flush of shame creeping up his neck. What would the boys at the saloon say? They'd laugh him out of town, call him a fool for hitching himself to a woman like her. He'd pictured someone smaller, someone who wouldn't make folks whisper. Disgust churned in his chest, not just at her, but at himself for feeling it. He stayed low, his hat pulled down, hoping she'd take the next train back east and save him the choice. Amelia didn't see him. Her heart was too busy thumping, her eyes too fixed on searching faces. She'd left Ohio with dreams of a new life, a place where she could be more than the girl everyone pitied. Back home, folks hadn't been kind. They'd called her names fat cow, lumbering ox, whispered loud enough to make her ears burn. At church suppers, she'd stood by the wall, her dress always pinching because her ma couldn't afford new ones. "You're too much," Amelia, her aunt, had said once, her voice soft but heavy with pity. Kids laughed when she walked by, their giggles chasing her home to hide in her room, where she'd dream of a place where she could be enough. She plopped onto a peeling bench, the wood groaning under her weight, and set her valise beside her. The air smelled of coal smoke and sage, sharp and strange compared to Ohio's muddy fields. The platform was alive with noise boots, thumping a baby, crying the clank of a hammer from the blacksmith across the street, but it felt like she was alone in it all. The sun sank lower, turning the sky orange, and still no James. She pulled out one of his letters, the ink smudged from her fingers, tracing the words. "I'll be there. Amelia," with a daisy and a promise. She tucked it away, her throat tight, telling herself he was held up, maybe fixing a broken fence or stuck at the general store. He'd come. He had to. She'd imagined James tall and steady, smiling as he took her hand. But now, sitting here, the platform growing quieter, she felt a cold fear creeping in. What if he'd lied? What if he'd seen her picture, the one she'd sent, where she'd stood sideways to look smaller, and changed his mind? Her fingers dug into the valise, her nails catching on the worn leather. She wasn't going back to Ohio, to the whispers, the pity, the way her ma's eyes said she was a burden. But what if this town was no different? A boy, maybe 12, ran by kicking dust into her face. He stopped eyeing her valise, then her. "You waitin' for someone, lady?" His voice was curious, not mean, but it made her flinch. "Yeah," Amelia said, her voice small. "My fiancé, James Harper. He's just late." The kid scratched his head, his cap crooked. "Ain't seen nobody hanging around but you." He shrugged and darted off, leaving her with a hollow feeling in her chest. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it, clinging to the thought that James was coming. The platform emptied out, just a few stragglers left, and the station hand, an old man with a limp, swept dirt into piles. The last train's whistle faded into the hills, and the silence hit her like a slammed door. She shifted her dress, sticking to her skin, and tried to focus on the good. This was her fresh start, wasn't it? The air here was dry, the sky wide, nothing like Ohio's heavy gray. James would show. Amelia didn't cry. Crying meant giving up, and she wasn't there yet. She pulled a stale biscuit from her valise saved from the train and nibbled it, the crumbs catching in her throat. The station hand limped over his broom, dragging. "Ma'am, you need a ride somewhere. Ain't safe out here after dark." She looked up, her eyes stinging. "I'm waiting for James Harper." "You know him?" The man's face tightened like he'd tasted something bad. "Saw him earlier by the ticket shed. He had left since mooring." His voice was kind, but it hit her like a punch. "Left." Amelia's voice broke. She looked around, hoping to see James now, maybe with that daisy saying he was sorry. The man nodded his head, his eyes heavy. "I'm sorry, ma'am." Her heart pounded a sharp pain that wasn't just hunger. She wanted to argue, to say James wouldn't do that he'd meant every word. But the man's look said enough. She nodded, lips pressed tight, and he shuffled off, leaving her with a truth she didn't want. James had seen her and walked away. The air turned cold as the sun dropped the sky, bruising purple. Amelia sat, hands in her lap, valise at her feet like a stubborn friend. James's letters had made her believe she could be more, that someone could want her. Now that hope was crumbling like the biscuit in her hand. She wouldn't go back. Not to that life, not to the whispers and pity. But as the stars came out cold and sharp, her courage faltered. She had no money, no place to sleep, nobody in this town. Her stomach growled louder, and she realized that biscuit was all she'd had since morning. The hunger was bad, but the fear was worse. Fear that she'd been a fool to trust James, to think she could be loved. Midnight came, the church bell ringing faint and far off. The platform was deserted, lit by one flickering lantern. Amelia's dress was damp, her bonnet sagging. She'd stopped looking for James, but she couldn't move. Moving meant admitting he wasn't coming, that her dream was dead. Her fingers brushed the valise, the only thing left from the girl who'd stepped off that train so full of hope. A laugh cut through the quiet, mean and high-pitched. Two women, their dresses tight and neat, walked by on the street, their faces shadowed by bonnets. Still sitting there, one said loud enough to sting, "Waitin' for a man who took one look and ran." The other giggled sharp as a knife, and they hurried off, their footsteps fading. Amelia's eyes burned, and this time tears came sliding down her face, soaking her collar. She stood up, her legs shaky, and walked to the edge of the platform where the lantern's light didn't reach. The town was quiet now, just the hum of crickets and the distant clink of glasses from the saloon. She looked out at the dark prairie, vast and empty, and felt a spark of something stubborn in her chest. Back in Ohio, She'd been nothing but a shadow too big to hide, too heavy to love. Here she was, still nothing, but she could be something. She didn't know how. Maybe she'd wash dishes at the boarding house, maybe she'd mend clothes till her fingers bled. But she wouldn't go back. "I ain't going back," she whispered, her voice rough but steady. "I won't." It was a promise, fragile but real. She turned back to the bench, picked up her valise, and started walking toward the town's only light, a flickering sign for the boarding house. Her shadow stretched long and steady behind her, not shrinking, not hiding. Whatever came next, she'd face it here, scared but stubborn, her heart bruised but still beating. Amelia's boots crunched on the gravel as she trudged toward the flickering sign of the boarding house, her valise banging against her leg with every step. The night air was cool, sharp, with the smell of dust and horse manure, and Willow Creek's main street stretched out quiet and dark, save for a few lanterns glowing outside shops shuttered for the night. Her stomach growled a low, nagging ache, but it was the sting of James's betrayal that hurt worse. She'd come all this way, her heart full of his promises, only to be left alone on a train platform. Now, with no money and no one to turn to, she had to find a place to sleep before the cold settled into her bones. She wasn't going back to Ohio, where folks had laughed at her size and called her a burden. But standing in this strange town, her shadow long under the moonlight, she wondered if she'd traded one kind of rejection for another. The boarding house door creaked as she pushed it open, a bell jangling above. The front room smelled of stale coffee and candle wax, with a worn counter and a few rickety chairs scattered around. A woman behind the counter looked up, her gray hair pulled tight in a bun, her eyes sharp like she'd seen every kind of trouble. "We're full up," she said before Amelia could open her mouth. "Try the saloon. They got cots sometimes." Amelia's throat tightened, but she stepped closer, her voice low. "Ma'am, I got nowhere else. I just need a corner to sleep in. I can pay. Somehow. I'll work." The woman's eyes narrowed, taking in Amelia's rumpled dress and the valise clutched like a lifeline. "Ain't got no room for charity cases. Move on." Amelia's shoulders sagged, but she didn't budge. She tried the next place, a small inn down the street where a man with a tobacco-stained beard laughed outright. "You stay here, girl. You'd eat us out of house and home." His words cut deep, echoing the taunts from Ohio, and she hurried out before tears could fall. She knocked on doors, a mercantile, a livery stable, even a church with a sagging steeple, but the answers were the same. Sharp refusals, sneers about her size, or doors slammed in her face. By the time she reached the edge of town, her feet ached, and her hope was as thin as the threadbare shawl around her shoulders. The last stop was Maggie's boarding house, a squat building with a sign that read, "Rooms and meals" in faded paint. Amelia hesitated, her hand hovering over the door. She was tired, hungry, and scared, but the memory of Ohio's laughter pushed her forward. She wouldn't go back to being the girl who hid. The bell jingled as she stepped inside, and a woman looked up from scrubbing a table. Maggie was lean and tough, her face lined like old leather, her eyes carrying the weight of someone who'd buried more than she'd loved. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice gruff but not cruel. Amelia swallowed, her mouth dry. "I need a place to stay, ma'am. I got no money, but I'll work. I'll clean cook anything. Please." Maggie straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "I don't take in strays. Got enough to handle without another mouth to feed." Amelia's heart sank, but she stepped closer, her voice shaking. "I ain't a stray, ma'am. I came here for a new start, but the man who promised me a home didn't show. I got nowhere else. and I ain't going back to where I came from. Please, I'll do whatever you need." Maggie's eyes softened, just a flicker, like she saw something in Amelia's face that reminded her of her own hard days. She sighed, tossing her rag on the table. "Fine. You can sleep in the back room, but you'll work for it. Laundry, floors, dishes. No slacking, you hear?" Amelia nodded, tears prickling her eyes. "Thank you, ma'am. You won't regret it." "Don't call me ma'am," Maggie snapped. "It's Maggie. Now get that bag off my floor and follow me." The back room was small, with a narrow cot, a cracked wash basin, and a window that rattled in the wind. Amelia set her valise down, her hands trembling with relief and exhaustion. She didn't care that the mattress was lumpy or that the room smelled of damp wood. It was hers, at least for now, and that was enough. Life at Maggie's was hard. Amelia woke before dawn, her back stiff from the cot, and started her day hauling water from the well. Her hands, used to needlework, and not much else, blistered as she scrubbed pots, swept floors, and washed sheets that felt heavier than her own heart. The work left her sore, her fingers raw, but she didn't complain. Every chore was a step away from Ohio, from the whispers that had followed her like shadows. She learned to move through the boarding house quiet and quick, keeping her head down when guests passed through, their eyes lingering on her wide frame. Not everyone was kind. Mrs. Clara, a widow who owned half the town's land, came by every week to sip tea and gossip with Maggie. She'd look at Amelia like she was a stain on the floor. "That girl's a burden," Clara said one afternoon, her voice loud enough to carry. "Too big to be useful, too slow to keep up." "Why'd you take her in?" Maggie Amelia, scrubbing dishes in the next room, froze her hands, shaking in the soapy water. The words stung, bringing back memories of Ohio, where folks had called her a monster just for existing. She bit her lip, focusing on the plate in her hands, telling herself Clara didn't matter. But the hurt lingered heavy as the iron skillet she dried. Maggie didn't answer. Clara just poured more tea, but Amelia noticed the way her jaw tightened. It wasn't much, but it was something. Then there was Tom, a young cowboy who stopped by most mornings for coffee. He was lanky, with a quick smile and a habit of carrying a dog-eared book under his arm. Unlike most, he didn't stare at Amelia's size. He'd sit at the counter sipping coffee and ask about the novels she'd read back east. "You ever read them stories from China?" he asked one day, his eyes bright. "Got dragons and all." Amelia blushed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yeah, I read one or two. Liked 'em better than the Bible stories my mom made me read." Tom grinned. "You're a reader then. Ain't many like that around here." His kindness threw her off, made her want to hide. She wasn't used to folks being nice without wanting something. She'd mumble excuses and slip back to the kitchen, her heart racing, wondering if he was just being polite or if he saw something in her she couldn't see herself. One evening, as Amelia hauled a basket of laundry to the line, a man named Hank, a regular at the saloon, stumbled by, reeking of whiskey. He was big, with a mean glint in his eye, and he stopped when he saw her. "Lord, girl," he slurred, his voice loud enough to draw eyes. "You're bigger'n my horse. Ain't nobody in this town gonna want you taking up space like that." Amelia's face burned, her hands clutching the basket. She wanted to snap back to tell him to shut his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. All she could do was stand there, the old shame washing over her, making her feel small despite her size. She thought of Ohio, of the boys who'd thrown stones at her shadow, and her eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. Lord Girl Hank slurred his voice loud enough to draw eyes. "You're bigger'n my horse. Ain't nobody in this town gonna want you taking up space like that." Before Amelia could flinch or turn away, the screen door banged open, and Maggie stepped out like a storm ready to strike. She planted herself between Amelia and Hank with a force that made him stumble back half a step. "You just say that out loud, Hank Trotter," she snapped, her voice slicing the air. "'Cause if you did, I sure hope your horse has more brains than you, though that's a low damn bar." Hank blinked, his drunken smirk faltering. "It was just a joke." "Oh, a joke, was it?" Maggie's eyes burned. "Well, ain't that funny? You stumble in here reeking like you bathed in spoiled corn mash, mouthful of garbage, and you got the gall to insult my help." She snatched a broom from the porch and swung it like she'd been waiting for this moment all week. It landed in his gut with a solid thwack. Hank doubled over, gasping. Maggie didn't wait. She leaned in, voice low and venomous. "You come around here spitting bile like that again, and I'll make sure you're chewing on splinters for supper. You hear me, you moldy sack of whiskey and regrets?" He coughed, wheezing, still clutching his stomach. She straightened, towering over him. "Go on now. Get. Before I lose what little mercy I got left for men who talk big, 'cause their brain's the only thing smaller than their dignity." Hank stumbled backward, muttering curses, but one sharp glare from Maggie made him trip over his own boots trying to retreat. The few townsfolk who had stopped to watch quickly scattered, whispering behind hands, pretending they hadn't seen a damn thing. Amelia stood frozen, chest heaving, face flushed with shame and shock. Maggie turned to her face, still fierce, but her tone softer, though still edged. "You don't let scum like him talk to you like that," she said. "You got a spine, girl. Use it. The world ain't gonna hand you respect. You gotta take it. And sometimes you gotta swing a broom to get it." Amelia's throat tightened and tears spilled over before she could stop them. "Nobody's ever stood up for me before," she said, her voice breaking. "Back in Ohio, they called me names, said I was a freak. I thought coming here would be different, but I'm still just too much." Maggie's face softened just for a second before she looked away, like feelings were something she didn't trust. "You ain't too much. You're just you. Folks like Hank, they're the ones who ain't enough. Don't let 'em make you small." Amelia wiped her eyes, her chest aching with gratitude. Maggie didn't say more, just handed her the broom and went back inside her steps, brisk like nothing had happened. But Amelia stood there, the broom heavy in her hands, feeling something shift inside her. For the first time, someone had seen her, really seen her, and hadn't turned away. She went back to work, hanging laundry as the sun dipped low, painting the sky red. The days were long, the work brutal, but she was learning how to scrub stains out of linens, how to keep her head high when Clara sneered, how to smile at Tom without flinching. Maggie's words stuck with her like a seed taking root. She wasn't sure she could stand up for herself yet, but she was starting to believe she might learn how. And in this dusty town with its hard work and harder people, that was enough to keep her going. She was starting to find her place here, even if folks like Clara, the rich widow, still sneered at her size. Maggie's gruff kindness and the slow rhythm of chores gave her something to hold on to, something that felt like a life. And then there was Tom, the lanky cowboy who'd linger at the counter with his coffee and books, his easy smile making her heart skip in a way she wasn't ready to trust. She was folding a towel when she heard boots on the porch, heavy and deliberate. She turned, expecting Maggie or a guest, but her breath caught at the sight of James Harper standing there in a clean vest, his hat tipped back, his eyes sharp with something she couldn't read. Her stomach twisted, a mix of old hope and fresh dread. He was the man who'd written her letters full of promises, who'd said he'd love her no matter what, only to vanish when he saw her at the station. Now he was here looking at her like he had a right to be. "Well, Amelia," he said, his voice smooth but uneasy, "you're looking settled in." She clutched the towel, her knuckles white. "What do you want, James?" Her voice was steady, but inside her heart was pounding, memories of his betrayal flooding back. Maggie appeared at the door. Her apron smudged, her eyes narrowing like a hawk spotting James. "You got some nerve showing up here," she snapped, stepping forward. "I know who you are. You no good snake. Get off my porch before I fetch my broom." Amelia raised a hand, her voice soft but firm. "Maggie, wait. Let him talk." She didn't know why she stopped her. Maybe she needed to hear him out to understand why he'd left her to rot. James shifted his boots, scuffing the wood. "I owe you an explanation, Amelia. I didn't mean to leave you at the station. I got spooked is all. Business went bad and I had to make a choice. I married a woman with money, someone to keep the ranch afloat. But I don't love her. Never did. It's you I want." Amelia's chest tightened, her mind reeling. "You saw me and ran," she said, her voice shaking. "You left me there alone with nothing." "I was wrong," he said, stepping closer, his eyes locked on hers. "I was scared of what folks would say, but I see it now. You're more than I deserve. Be with me, Amelia. Not as a wife, I can't give you that, but as mine. I love you more than anything." The words hit like a slap, twisting her heart. Be his mistress. Hide in the shadows, a secret he'd keep while he lived with another woman. Her hands trembled not from love, but from the raw pain of realizing he still saw her as less. She thought of Ohio, of the folks who'd called her a monster, of the years she'd spent believing she'd never be enough. For a moment she wavered, the fear creeping in that this was all she'd ever get, a half-love, a hidden one. But then anger sparked, hot and sharp, burning through the doubt. "No," she said, her voice low but fierce. "I ain't your secret. I ain't your anything. Get out." James's face hardened, but he didn't move. "You'll change your mind," he said, tipping his hat like he was closing a deal. "I'll be back." She watched him walk away, his shadow long in the fading light, and her knees felt weak. That night, alone in her tiny room, she sat on the cot, her valise at her feet, and let the tears come. She'd loved him once, or at least the man in the letters, the one who'd promised her a home. Now all she could feel was the ache of being wanted, but not enough. She wasn't going back to Ohio, but staying here with James lurking felt like a different kind of trap. He came back the next day, and the day after, lingering at the boarding house, his eyes following her as she swept the porch or carried dishes. Maggie grumbled every time she saw him, muttering about no-account men, but Amelia kept her distance, her heart bruised but stubborn. She threw herself into work, scrubbing floors until her hands bled, hauling water until her shoulders screamed. The pain kept her grounded, kept her from thinking too hard about James, or the way her old fears whispered she'd never be loved right. Tom was different. He'd show up most mornings, his boots dusty, a book tucked under his arm, and sit at the counter with his coffee. He'd talk about stories he'd read, ask her about the novels. She loved his voice, easy and warm. "You ever read that one about the sailor lost at sea?" he asked one day, leaning forward, his eyes bright. "Reminds me of you coming all this way to start over." Amelia's cheeks warmed and she busied herself wiping the counter. "Ain't much of a sailor," she mumbled, dodging his gaze. His kindness scared her, made her wonder if it was real or if he'd turn away like James had. She'd slip back to the kitchen, her heart racing, telling herself it was better to stay alone than risk another hurt. Maggie caught her one afternoon rolling her eyes as Amelia ducked away from Tom. "Girl, that boy's sweet on you," she said, tossing a dish rag over her shoulder. "Tom ain't like most. He sees you, not just what folks say about you. Stop hiding." Amelia shook her head, her voice low. "I can't, Maggie. What if he changes his mind? I ain't..." I ain't the kind men stick around for." Maggie snorted, but her eyes were kind. "You're too hard on yourself. Tom's a good one. Give him a chance." Amelia didn't answer, but Maggie's words stuck like a pebble in her shoe. She wanted to believe Tom saw her differently, but the fear of being left again kept her guarded. Then James came back, and everything went sideways. It was a quiet afternoon, the boarding house near empty, and Amelia was setting out coffee cups when he walked in, his vest crisp, his smile smug. Tom was there leaning on the counter, reading a page aloud to make her laugh. Her smile froze as James stepped between them, his eyes hard. "What's this?" he said, glaring at Tom. "You moving in on my fiancé?" Amelia's heart stopped. "I ain't your fiancé," she said, her voice sharp. "You left me James. You got no claim." Tom stood, his jaw tight, his book forgotten. "You're the one who ditched her at the station," he said, his voice low but dangerous. Maggie had told him the story, and the anger in his eyes was real. "You don't get to waltz back in and act like she's yours." James laughed, cold and mean. "She'll always be mine. You think a nobody like you can take what's mine?" He shoved Tom, his fists clenched, ready to swing. Tom's hand balled into a fist, his arm pulling back, but Amelia grabbed his wrist, her voice desperate. "Tom, don't. Please just stop." Tom froze, his eyes meeting hers, full of hurt and confusion. He lowered his arm, stepping back, but his voice was steel. "You come near her again, Harper, and you'll regret it." James scrambled to his feet, brushing off his vest, his face red. "She's mine," he spat, pointing at Amelia. "You'll see. She'll come crawling back, and you'll be nothing but dust." He stormed out, leaving a tense silence behind. Amelia's legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, tears spilling over. She felt helpless, caught between James's lies and her own fears. Tom knelt beside her, hesitating before pulling her into his arms. She stiffened at first, then leaned into him, her sobs muffled against his shirt. He didn't say anything, just held her, his hand steady on her back, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. They stayed like that, the boarding house quiet around them, the air heavy with the smell of coffee and wood smoke. Amelia's heart ached not just for James's betrayal, but for the part of her that still wanted to believe in love, even after everything. Tom's arms were warm, solid, but she wasn't ready to trust them, not yet. That night, the town woke to chaos. Hoofbeats thundered down the street, followed by shouts and the crack of gunfire. A gang of outlaws, half drunk and looking for trouble, had ridden into Willow Creek, smashing windows and demanding cash. Maggie burst into Amelia's room, her face grim. "Get up, girl. We got trouble." Amelia scrambled out of bed, her heart racing. She followed Maggie to the main room where Tom was already barricading the door with tables. "Stay low," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "They're after the saloon's cash, but they'll hit here if they don't get it." Amelia's hands shook, but she didn't hide. She remembered the chili peppers and black powder in the kitchen left over from Maggie's stew. "I got an idea," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. She ran to the kitchen, grinding the peppers and powder into a tin, mixing it with water to make a stinging spray. When the outlaws pounded on the door, shouting threats, she handed the tin to Maggie. "Throw this in their faces." Maggie grinned, a rare sight. "You're full of surprises, girl." They waited, crouched behind the counter as the outlaws kicked at the door. When it splintered open, Maggie flung the spray and the men howled, clawing at their eyes. Tom shoved a table forward, knocking one to the ground, and Amelia grabbed a broom, swinging it hard at another. The outlaws stumbled back, cursing and half-blind, and rode off into the night as the townsfolk rallied with rifles. When it was over, Amelia stood panting, her hands trembling but her chin high. The folks who'd gathered outside looked at her differently, not with pity or scorn, but with something like respect. Maggie clapped her on the shoulder. "You did good, Amelia. Real good." Tom caught her eye, his smile soft. "Told you you're tougher than you think." Amelia's chest warmed, but the weight of James's words still lingered, pulling at her heart. She'd stood up to outlaws, but facing her own fears about love, about being enough, was harder. As she swept up the broken glass, her hands steady, despite the ache in her heart, she felt a spark of something new. Not courage, not yet, but a stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, she could build a life here with people who saw her for who she was. Amelia swept the broken glass from the boarding house floor, the broom's bristles scraping against the wood, each stroke steady, despite the ache in her chest. The outlaw attack had left the town rattled, but folks were already talking about her, how she'd mixed that pepper spray, how she'd swung a broom like a weapon. They called her brave, a hero, but the weight of James's words from the day before still clung to her heavy as wet laundry. He'd offered her a half-life, a secret love, and it had torn open old wounds from Ohio where she'd been called too big, too much, never enough. She'd faced down outlaws, but facing her fear of being unlovable was a harder fight. As she dumped the glass into a bucket, her hands steady, but her heart unsteady, she felt a spark of something new, not full courage, but a stubborn hope that maybe she could belong here with folks like Maggie and Tom, who saw her for who she was. Tom had been coming around more, his lanky frame a familiar sight at the boarding house counter. He'd help stack firewood or carry water, always with that easy smile, like he didn't mind her shyness or the way she'd duck away when he got too close. One morning he'd slipped a book of poems into her hands, the pages worn but precious, saying, "Found this in the mercantile. Thought you'd like it." She'd blushed, mumbling thanks, and tucked it under her pillow, too scared to believe his kindness was anything but pity. Her heart wanted to lean into him, but her head kept whispering that men like Tom, good men, didn't stay for women like her. Maggie noticed, of course. "That boy's sweet on you," she said one afternoon, tossing a rag over her shoulder as Amelia scrubbed pots. "He ain't here for my coffee, that's for sure. Why you keep running from him?" Amelia's cheeks burned her hands, pausing in the soapy water. "I ain't running. What if he's just being nice? I can't take another hurt, Maggie." Maggie snorted, her eyes sharp but warm. "Tom's got a good heart. You're too busy thinking you ain't worth it to see he's trying to show you different." Amelia didn't answer, but Maggie's words stuck nagging at her as she went about her chores. The town was buzzing about the upcoming harvest festival, a big shindig where folks would gather to eat, dance, and forget their troubles. Maggie and Tom pushed her to go, saying it'd do her good to get out. Amelia wasn't so sure. Crowds meant eyes, and eyes meant judgment. But she thought of Maggie's broom swinging at Hank, of Tom's quiet kindness, and decided maybe she could try. She spent evenings sewing a dress blue as a clear sky, simple but neat, hoping it'd make her feel less like the girl left at the station. The festival night was crisp, the air smelling of bonfires and fresh-baked cornbread. Lanterns hung from posts, casting a warm glow over the town square, where tables groaned under platters of roast beef and apple pies. Folks laughed. Kids darted through the crowd, and a fiddler's tune floated over it all. Amelia stood at the edge of the square, her new dress snug but flattering, her hands twisting together. She'd almost made it to the gate when she saw James arm in arm with a petite woman in a silk gown, her laughter bright as she leaned into him. He looked happy, his smile easy, like he'd never promised Amelia a life, and then walked away. Her stomach dropped, and she turned to leave, her boots scuffing the dirt. "You ain't running now, are you?" Tom's voice came from behind, gentle but firm. He stood there, his hat tipped back, his eyes steady on hers. She swallowed, her voice shaky. "James is here, with his wife. I can't face that." Tom stepped closer, his hand hovering like he wanted to touch her arm, but didn't. "You don't gotta face him alone. You ain't that girl at the station anymore, Amelia. You can't hide forever." Her heart pounded, but his words hit home. She nodded barely, and he offered his arm. She took it, her fingers trembling, and they walked into the square together. Whispers rippled through the crowd as folks noticed Tom, who was introduced by the mayor as the son of the region's biggest banker. Gasps followed, heads turning, and Amelia felt their eyes on her too, wondering why a man like Tom was with her. He squeezed her hand, leaning close. "Smile, Amelia. Show him you belong." She managed a small smile, her voice a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" He grinned, his eyes twinkling. "You never asked." They moved through the crowd, folks staring, some nodding in respect, others murmuring. Amelia's chest tightened, but Tom's hand was warm, steady, keeping her grounded. Then she saw James approaching his wife, tugging his arm, her smile calculated. "James, you must meet Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice sweet but sharp. "It'll be good for business." James's face was tight, his eyes flicking to Amelia with something dark, anger maybe, or shame. He nodded at Tom, his voice flat. "Pleasure." Tom shook his hand, his tone easy but cool. "Likewise. This here's Amelia, my friend." James's wife, Ellen, raised an eyebrow, her gaze sweeping over Amelia's dress. "Oh, you're the girl from the boarding house. How quaint." Tom's smile didn't waver. "Amelia's special to me. She's got a way of keeping folks at arm's length, though. I'm working on that." Amelia's face warmed, but before she could speak, James snorted. "Special. She's just a girl who thought she could snag a husband and ended up washing dishes. Ain't that right, Amelia?" The words cut deep, dragging her back to the station, to Ohio, to every moment she'd felt less than. Her hands shook, and she saw Tom's jaw tighten, his eyes flashing. He opened his mouth, but Amelia stepped forward, her voice low but clear. "You don't get to talk about me like that, James. I ain't the girl you left behind. I'm here living my life, and I don't need your pity or your lies." The crowd hushed, heads turning. James's face reddened, his mouth opening, but no words came. Ellen tugged his arm, her smile tight. "Come, James. Let's not make a scene." Maggie, standing nearby, wiped a tear from her eye, her face proud but stern. The fiddler struck up a new tune, and Tom took Amelia's hand, leading her to the dance floor. "You did good," he whispered, his grip firm but gentle. "Real good." They danced slow and awkward at first, but his hand on her waist felt like a promise, not of love, not yet, but of respect. The crowd clapped, some cheering, and for the first time Amelia felt seen, not as a burden, but as herself. Next morning, Amelia stood behind the counter at Maggie's, wiping down the wood, her hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. James tried to come around after the festival, his face sheepish, mumbling apologies about his words about leaving her. She cut him off, her voice firm. "You made your choice, James. I've made mine. Don't come back." He left town a few days later, his wife's carriage kicking up dust as they rode out. Folks said he'd lost face, that his business deals had soured. Amelia didn't care. She was done carrying his weight in her heart. The boarding house kept her busy, the work still hard but familiar now, like a rhythm she'd learned to live by. She scrubbed floors, mended linens, and cooked pots of stew, her hands calloused but capable. The townsfolk started nodding to her on the street, some even smiling, their whispers turning from judgment to curiosity. She'd saved enough from her wages to rent a small shop down the street, a narrow room with a cracked window and a creaky door. She set up a sewing table, her needles and thread lined up like soldiers, and started taking orders for dresses and shirts. Her first customer was a farmer's wife who praised the neat stitches on a skirt. Word spread, and soon Amelia had a steady stream of work, her days filled with the soft hum of thread pulling through fabric. It wasn't much, but it was hers, built from her own hands, not anyone's promises. Tom came by often, leaning against the shop's counter with a book or helping her move bolts of cloth. He'd read her lines from Whitman or tell stories about his pa's bank, his voice easy, like they'd known each other forever. One afternoon, he sat by the window, sunlight catching his dusty hair, and said, "You ever think about setting down roots here, Amelia? For good." She paused, her needle hovering. "I'm trying. It's hard to believe I belong anywhere." He looked at her, his eyes soft. "You belong right here, with folks who see you." Her heart skipped, but she didn't look away. Not this time. Their talks were like that simple quiet, no pressure to be anything but themselves. She wasn't ready to call it love, but it was something close, something that felt safe. Even Clara, the widow who'd once called her a burden, came around. She stood in the shop one day, her lips pursed, holding a bolt of green silk. "I need a dress for the mayor's dinner," she said, her voice stiff but polite. "I hear you're good with a needle." Amelia nodded, keeping her face calm. "I'll do my best, Mrs. Clara." The dress was a hit, and Clara's thank you was curt but real. Amelia saw it then, how her work, her quiet stubbornness was changing folks' minds, not by fighting, but by being herself, steady and sure. She wasn't trying to prove anything anymore, just living, and that was enough. One evening after closing the shop, Amelia stood in front of the small mirror in her room. Her face was the same round plane with freckles from the sun, but her eyes were different. They held a calm she hadn't known before, a peace that came from building something real. She didn't need a man's love to feel whole, not James's, not even Tom's. She'd found her worth in the stitches she sewed, the meals she cooked, the way she'd stood up at the festival. Willow Creek wasn't just a place to survive anymore, it was home. She thought of Maggie, who'd given her a chance when no one else would, and Tom, who'd seen her when she couldn't see herself. They were her roots, deep and strong, holding her steady. As she blew out the candle, the room dark with the promise of a new day. Amelia smiled. She was free, not because someone chose her, but because she'd chosen herself. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the smell of dry leaves and wood smoke, as Amelia stood on the weathered platform of Willow Creek's train station. Her boots pressed into the same splintered boards where a year ago she'd waited for a man who never came, her heart full of hope and her hands clutching a worn valise. Now she held a basket of oatmeal cookies still warm from her oven, wrapped in a checkered cloth. Her blue dress, one she'd sewn herself, fit snug, but comfortable, no longer a shield to hide her size, but a quiet statement of who she'd become. The station was the same dusty creaking with the faint hum of voices and the clatter of distant wagons, but Amelia was different. Her eyes, once clouded with fear and shame, now held a steady calm like the prairie after a storm had passed. She wasn't here to meet anyone special, not like before. She'd come to drop off a package for a customer at the ticket office, but the whistle of an incoming train had drawn her to the platform, stirring memories she hadn't touched in months. She thought of that day, the heat of the sun, the sting of James's betrayal, the way her heart had cracked when she learned he'd seen her and walked away. Back then, she'd been a stranger in Willow Creek, a girl from Ohio carrying the weight of years of taunts, too big, too much, never enough. Now, as she stood under the faded awning, the townsfolk passing by nodded to her, some even smiling. She wasn't just the girl who'd been left behind anymore. She was Amelia, the seamstress, with the little shop, the one who'd faced down outlaws and stood up to James at the Harvest Festival. The train pulled in with a groan, steam hissing, and wheels screeching, kicking up dust that swirled around her skirt. Folks gathered, some waiting for packages, others for family, their voices mingling with the clank of unloading crates. Amelia stepped back, her basket heavy in her hands, and watched as passengers spilled onto the platform. Her eyes caught on a young woman no older than she'd been a year ago, stepping down with a small valise clutched tight. The girl's dress was plain patched at the hem, and her shoulders hunched like she was trying to make herself smaller. Her eyes darted around, wide and nervous, searching for someone who wasn't there. Amelia's chest tightened, a memory of her own fear, flashing sharp, standing alone, waiting for James, feeling the town's stares like needles. The girl's gaze met hers, and Amelia saw it, the same mix of hope and dread she'd carried that first day. Whispers rippled through the crowd, folks leaning close to murmur, their eyes flicking to the girl's worn shoes and trembling hands. "Another one come looking for a husband," a woman muttered nearby, her voice low but cutting. "Poor thing left high and dry, I bet." A man chuckled, shaking his head, and Amelia felt a familiar ache, the echo of those same whispers that had followed her. She thought of Ohio, of the kids who'd laughed at her shadow, the aunts and uncles who'd sighed like her size was a problem they couldn't fix. She'd sworn she'd never go back to that, and she hadn't. But this girl standing alone with her valise looked like she was carrying that same weight. Amelia took a deep breath, her fingers tightening on the basket. She could walk away, deliver her package, and go back to her shop where orders for dresses and shirts waited. But something held her there, a pull she couldn't ignore. She thought of Maggie, who'd given her a chance when no one else would, and Tom, whose quiet kindness had shown her she was worth seeing. They'd helped her find her place, and now standing on this platform, she knew she couldn't let this girl face the same loneliness she had. She stepped forward, her boots soft on the boards, and stopped in front of the girl. Up close, she saw the freckles on her cheeks, the way her hands shook as she gripped her valise. Amelia smiled, gentle but sure, and held out her hand. "Welcome to Willow Creek," she said, her voice warm. "I'm Amelia. You'll be all right here, I promise." The girl blinked, her eyes wide like she hadn't expected anyone to speak to her. I'm Sarah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was supposed to meet someone, but he ain't here." Amelia's heart squeezed, but she kept her smile steady. "I know how that feels. Come on, let's get you out of this dust. I got a shop nearby, and these cookies ain't gonna eat themselves." Sarah hesitated, then took Amelia's hand, her grip tentative but real. As they walked off the platform, Amelia felt the townsfolk watching, their whispers quieter now, less mean. She didn't look back, but she could feel the weight of that moment, the way it mirrored her own arrival, except this time, someone was there to meet it. She thought of the girl she'd been, scared and alone, and the woman she was now, not perfect, but whole, not fearless, but brave enough to keep going. They walked down the main street, the air cool and sharp, the sky turning gold as the sun dipped low. Amelia's shop wasn't far, just a small room with a cracked window and a sign that read, "Gray's Sewing." Inside it smelled of thread and fresh cotton, with bolts of fabric stacked neat, and a sewing table cluttered with pins. She set the basket on the counter, offering Sarah a cookie, and watched as the girl nibbled it, her shoulders easing just a bit. "You got a place to stay?" Amelia asked, keeping her voice soft. Sarah shook her head, her eyes on the floor. "I got a little money, but not much. I thought he'd be here." Amelia nodded, her throat tight. "I've been there. You can stay with me tonight and we'll figure it out. Maggie. She runs the boarding house. She's tough but fair. She'll help you like she helped me." Sarah looked up, her eyes wet but grateful. "Why are you being so nice? You don't even know me." Amelia smiled, a little sad, a little strong. "'Cause I know what it's like to step off that train and find nobody waiting. You ain't alone, not here." They sat for a while, sharing cookies and quiet, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. Amelia thought of her journey, the station, James's betrayal, the hard days at Maggie's, the way Tom's smile had chipped away at her walls. She'd built a life here, stitch by stitch, not because anyone handed it to her, but because she'd chosen to stay, to fight for it. Helping Sarah felt like closing a circle, like giving back what Maggie and Tom had given her. As the sky darkened, Amelia locked up the shop, leading Sarah toward the boarding house. From across the street near Maggie's porch, Tom stood waiting, his hat in his hands, his smile soft as he waved. "Brought you some company." Looks like he called his voice warm. Amelia's chest warmed, the sight of him steadying her like always. "This is Sarah," she said, glancing at the girl. "She's new in town. Gonna need a friend." Tom nodded, his eyes meeting Amelia's, full of that quiet understanding she'd come to trust. "Reckon we can manage that." They walked toward the boarding house, the lantern light casting long shadows behind them. Amelia glanced back at the station, its platform empty now, the train long gone. She remembered the girl she'd been waiting for, a man who didn't show, carrying the weight of Ohio's taunts. That girl was gone, not because she'd changed her face or her size, but because she'd found her strength, her place, her people. She wasn't the bride left behind anymore. She was Amelia Gray, a woman who'd chosen her own life, her hustler casino, her own love. As they reached the porch, Maggie stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. "Who's this?" she asked, eyeing Sarah. "Newcomer," Amelia said. "Needs a place to crash." Maggie grunted, but her eyes softened. "Room's tight, but we'll manage. Come on in, girl." Inside by the firelight, Amelia saw Sarah relax her valise, set down like a weight lifted. Tom sat nearby, whittling a stick, his presence calm and steady. Amelia's heart stirred, not with fear, but with something softer, something she wasn't afraid of anymore. She looked at him, then at Sarah, and felt the truth settle deep. She'd made a home here, not just for herself, but for others who needed one. She stepped outside for a moment, the cool air brushing her face, and looked toward the station one last time. The stars were bright, the night quiet, and she felt a peace she hadn't known she could have. She wasn't running anymore, not from herself or her past. She was home, and that was enough. And that's the story of Amelia Gray, a woman who was once left behind, but never let herself stay there. Writing this story was deeply personal for me because Amelia's journey isn't just fiction. It's a reflection of the battles so many of us face every day. The fear of not being enough, the sting of rejection, the weight of shame we never asked to carry. But more importantly, it's about the quiet, fierce resilience it takes to rebuild, to plant roots, claim your space, and find your worth without waiting for someone else to give it to you. This story isn't about revenge or perfect romance. It's about dignity, about finding power in kindness, in hard work, in showing up for yourself even when the world tells you to shrink. It's about women like Amelia, like Maggie, and maybe like you who've had to stand tall when no one else would. To me, that's the heart of this story. Your value isn't measured by your appearance, your past, or who chooses you. It's in how you choose yourself. Every time. If this story touched you even just a little, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt like Amelia? Do you know someone who's fought the same fight? Drop a comment below. Let's talk about it. Let's keep stories like these alive because they matter more than we realize. And hey, thank you for staying till the end. It means more than you know. See you in the next story, friend.